Here. Awesome. All right, welcome everyone to the first panel event of the new year, and I am excited to be helping facilitate this. We're going to be talking about what does it take to be a sustainable campus, and we have folks from Boise State and elsewhere, and I think this should be a really interesting discussion to start the new year off right. So I am Carson McPherson-Krutzke. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Hazard and Climate Resilience Institute. And this panel series is focused on a range of topics under this umbrella of sustainability and resilience. And it's supported in part by the Boise State Grand Challenge Resource Nexus for Sustainability. Before we jump into topics, I want to try to change my slide, but it's now not letting me. There you go. To give an overarching picture of the goal of these monthly panels that we've been having since the school year started. And really the goal of these panels are to connect across the university, across disciplines, but also connect across sectors with community partners, to learn about ongoing projects and organizations, to find out how university researchers and students can support local efforts and information needs, to consider what actions we can all take moving forward. I like to start with a couple definitions. The first one being community resilience, which is the capacity of a community or region to adapt to change and thrive despite the chronic stresses and acute shocks they may experience. And then today, of course, in all these panels, we're talking about sustainability, which involves meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And if the panelists have other definitions of this they want to bring up, we're very open to it, because I think there's a lot of ways to define sustainability and how that applies to different people in different situations. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ari Weidemeyer, who is the Sustainability Manager for Boise State University, and he's going to be facilitating the questions for the next 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to keep about 15 minutes at the end for audience questions. So feel free, if you have questions during the next little while, feel free to put those in the chat, and then we'll collect those and then bring them back for the panelists later. So go ahead, Ari.
Thank you so much, Carson. Hi, everyone. My name is Ari Weidemeyer, use he, him pronouns, Sustainability Manager for Boise State Camp Sustainability. Really happy to be moderating this panel today. I get to work with all these folks on the panel in some different capacities, and so I'll just jump right into some introductions. So first off, Amy Parrish is Boise State's new Sustainability Director, starting around last November. She previously served as the Climate and Stability Coordinator at the City of Boise, and help implement the city's climate action plan and report progress. Suzy Arnette has been with Boise State for over 10 years and serves as the Director of Environmental Health, Safety, and Sustainability. She has overseen the growth of camp sustainability from its conception and oversees the Sustainability Governance Council. Paul Edlund joined the MSU Office of Sustainability as Project Coordinator during the fall of 2019 at Montana State University. Paul is most excited to collaborate with equally motivated and determined students to improve MSU's environmental impact by way of sustainable reporting and meaningful programs. And finally, Sarah Dawson started at University of Idaho last August as Director of Sustainability and reports directly under the President's Office. Before that, Sarah worked as the Director of the Center for Sustainable Environment at Franklin and Marshall College for several years. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. How this will kind of go about is I'll ask some questions and I'll direct it at a certain panelist, but panelists feel free to jump in and answer questions if I don't direct it at you. And if you are unsure, feel free to pass it to someone else as well. So to get started, our first question is, how does your university define sustainability? How is this definition agreed on, and were students involved? And I'll start with Sarah.
Thanks very much for that question. So the brief answer is we don't have a universal definition for sustainability at the college, at the university. So what we do is reference sustainability in our highest organizational documents as one of our values and have some descriptive language around that. And we also have definitions for sustainability within the criteria for our new all college sustainability certificate. And we have a definition on our website, and we have definitions in a number of other documents, but we haven't gotten to the place yet where we have one that we're using comprehensively. I think, there are benefits, there are drawbacks and benefits for that. For instance, in our sustainability certificate, we wanted to be able to have definitions for ecological sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability. We wanted to make that very broad and inclusive, especially because we have every college on campus participating in that certificate. Whereas in some of our other documents, it seems pretty clear that we're referring to environmental sustainability. So as you said, I've only been here for about 5 months. There's plenty to do, and we might get to the point where we do have a definition that we're using universally, but so far we don't. So I'd love to hear what other people are doing.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I'd love to invite any other panelists to help answer this question. Again, I'll repeat it. This is a refresher. So how does your university define sustainability, and how is that definition agreed upon? Were students involved?
I'll hop in real quick. Boise State's actually in a similar place, Sarah, as to U of I. We have a few working definitions that are very similar to the definition that Carson started us off with, just like merging economy, society, and the environment. But we don't have one universal definition, which maybe is good. Or maybe if there's just general agreement as to what it needs, that's enough. I'm not sure. I'm very new here in the university sustainability space. And so it's interesting, like the conversations that happen here are a little different than my previous job. Like there wasn't as much like thinking about, for example, what a definition of sustainability should be. In my previous role, it was more like, okay, what are we going to do to address climate action? And so it's kind of fun to be in this space where we get to think more about things like this and get people on board. Do you have anything to add, Suzy? I saw you unmuted.
Yes, I was going to say the same, that we don't yet have a universal definition. And back when we started our Sustainability Governance Council, and we have these different subcommittees that are based on the STARS structure, I think each group came up with somewhat of a different version of what sustainability meant to them. And so I think next steps are for us on campus would be to get a bigger working group together and decide if we can even come up with a universal, or maybe we just come up with a set of goals that we're working towards instead of a definition.
Suzy, I think that's a really great question, especially the question along the lines of like, can we define sustainability as an institution? Because to me, the way that I think about define sustainability is that it's a very individual concept, that if people have individual needs, so too their definition of sustainability will look different. And is there a space for a university to say, this is our definition of sustainability, if that's what the president of a university says? But can there also be space for, if a president says that, can an individual student also say, this is my personal definition of sustainability? Can both of those exist at the same time? I hope so, but I don't know if that's been done yet.
That's a great question.
Here at Montana State University, we kind of lean into two different cultural identities. One here in Montana is this concept of stewardship, that the people of Montana have a pretty close connection to the land on which they live. And so in the strategic plan at Montana State University for the past almost decade, I think, there has been language about stewardship, which is defined in the most current strategic plan as being, we care for and conserve the human, economic, physical, and environmental resources entrusted to us. So in that stewardship definition, there's human, economic, physical, and environmental, which sums up pretty nicely those three pillars. So that's not defined sustainability, that's defined stewardship according to our strategic plan. But what also happened just this past fall here at MSU is the Sustainability Advisory Committee came up with this committee's definition of sustainability. This is not MSU's definition, but this is the group that has been delegated to recommend sustainability goals to our president. And that group chose to define it as sustainability at MSU is the process and action through which campus community lives up the land grant mission by cultivating resilience for our natural environment, economic viability, and social welfare to meet the needs of our campus and Montana's urban, rural, and tribal communities. And that took about a semester to come to terms with, but we really liked it because it incorporated our land grant mission, the meeting the needs language, and also the three pillars of sustainability. But that's for this committee. That's not MSU's definition. That's the definition of this advisory committee.
Great, thank you so much for responding to that question. Our second question we have is, where does sustainability start? And do you think a ground up or top down approach is needed? And I'll ask that question to Amy.
I think it's both. I think you need both top down and ground up. I think that the ground up demonstrates to the top that there's like a lot of interest and passion for sustainability within the organization. However, I think that in order to really get things moving, and especially to get funding for initiatives, you need support from the top. And so I think a great example of this at Boise State is what's been done with electric vehicles. So the fleet managers at Boise State have been transitioning the fleet to electric vehicles without any top-down support. Like it's not like someone said, don't do it. I mean, people are supportive. However, there was no directive like, okay, you will transition to electric vehicles. This was a bottom-up approach because they realized it saved money. It was better for like the local air quality. A lot of the electric vehicles that they've transitioned are the neighborhood electric vehicles that drive around campus. And before they were spewing diesel fumes, and now they spew zero fumes. And so it's a lot better for the health of the community. And people love them too. And they've also transitioned to electric bikes. However, now they're getting a little bit stuck where they need a lot more infrastructure. They would like to transition all the vehicles they can to electric, but they need some more infrastructure, and to put in chargers is expensive. And this is where I think like a top-down approach of recognizing like, yes, we want to work on climate action at our university and it's a priority, and here's some funding or here's some grant support to write grants to get that funding in order to install the infrastructure that's needed to get there. So that's just one specific example. But I think both are important, and I just want to say, like, we do have some top support at the university. We just they approved our sustainability action plan. And so we're really looking forward to like going all in on implementing some things in the near future.
I can jump in, and I agree with what Amy has said, and definitely the buy-in from both sides. I've seen and experienced where, it was sustainability was a directive handed down, and it didn't really stick because the people at the bottom were like, oh, it's just another thing you want me to do on top of everything else I'm doing. Instead of saying, hey, we would like to implement a sustainability program. What sort of ideas do you have for your program or your job that could make us more sustainable, either, financially or environmentally, those sorts of things, and including those thoughts and opinions, because you need to talk to the people who are actually doing the work. You can present ideas, and I've seen this in the past where, it's like, well, we're just going to eliminate all the custodial supplies that you have been working, and we're going to go to all green chemicals, and it makes their job a whole lot harder. They have to use a whole lot more. So having those conversations from, here's an idea from one side, and the other side says, yeah, here, I think this can work this way, or no, we've tried that in the past, can get you a lot further, a lot faster. So definitely having both at the table.
I would just maybe add that having worked, so my last college, I worked with many students to try to convince the senior administration to implement a number of projects related to sustainability, and the success of those efforts was directly related to who the president was at that time. I had 4 presidents in the 14 years I was at my last position. And so I think, senior administrators do care what students care about. And I think especially that's become especially explicit in the last years as these surveys have come out saying, 75% of students are making decisions on colleges based on how seriously those colleges are taking sustainability. So folks are seeing the writing on the wall. But I do think there's not much that can happen without senior support. And every step between those who are trying to initiate a change and the ultimate decision makers is one more potential for a roadblock to happen. So as much as I wish it was just sort of individual enthusiasm and passion that was changing everything, I do think having folks with ultimate decision-making power on your side is what gets the big stuff done at the end of the day.
As I'm thinking about this, I think about my identity as like, do I identify as the middleman between the top down and the bottom up? Is that where I'm sitting, that I am connecting students who have vision with administrators who have the resources? Do you all identify with an expression of that? Is that how you all feel in your positions as well?
For sure.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, I'm so new, I'm still figuring it out, but I'll just agree with Suzy that yes. That's
ultimately, I mean, that's the most important piece in my mind, because it's translating, it's sort of like the science policy interface. It's translating the information into a compelling package to get the people who are making the decisions, convince them to make a change. Just my opinion. I think it's super important.
Great, thank you so much for responding to that question as well. We'll go ahead and move on to our next question, which is, what does sustainable governance mean, and how are your respective universities implementing it? And I'll start with Suzy on this one.
Thanks, Ari. So I will start with what sustainable governance means. And I did a quick Google search just because I know that it probably differs depending on where you are. But the basic gist is aligning your interests and priorities across all the stakeholders that are involved at your organization. For us, it would be our students, the parents, our faculty, our staff, and then our community, because we are very much, you know, a community-centered institution. We serve the community and the state. So making sure that all of those folks and our alumni, I shouldn't forget them, that's a huge group too, that they're invited to the table and they can see, you know, and chime in on what they've seen at Boise State in the past and what they'd like to see in the future, and how do we develop goals and tackle those goals so that we keep the basic vision of Boise State intact, but we can also see how we want to grow and expand and improve our sustainability footprint in the future. And right now, I would say we've done a pretty good job of making sure all the stakeholders are at the table. I think we, through our conversations with departments or community partners, we're finding out that there are stakeholders out there that we didn't know were there. So that's a fun surprise usually with every conversation that we have. And also, and the other universities may experience this too, higher ed tends to be very siloed when it comes to the operations side and the academic side. And even then within those departments, those divisions are different departments that are siloed. So making sure we break down those silos to have these conversations and getting everybody to understand that we are all under this umbrella of our respective institutions. We're all playing for the same team. And so how do we overcome those silos to get to a common set of goals that we're working towards?
What are some other people's thoughts about sustainable governance, and do we have potentially have like examples of sustainable governance at your universities?
I'll chime in that I think that Boise State has started to break down those silos. So I think Suzy's done some really awesome work before I showed up here. And we have an entity called the Sustainable Governance Council, which is this group of faculty, staff, and students that work together. They were initially started to complete our first STARS report, which is sort of a sustainability report for universities. And then they morphed into writing our sustainability action plan, which is a gigantic job. And it was, I think it's really neat. Like that's another actually example of like sort of a top down, bottom up approach. Like it was like the bottom up that wrote this plan and said, this is what we want to do. And this is how we want to do it. And now the leadership has said, yes, like, let's do some sustainability. We're in. And that all came because of this Sustainability Governance Council of like 80 people. So many people contributed to this and so many voices were heard. And I think was such an inclusive environment. However, as Suzy mentioned, we did miss a few key groups. This all also happened during COVID. And so that made maybe the communication a little bit more challenging with the wider campus community of what was happening. And so, yeah, we really look forward to doing a little bit better job in connecting some of these stakeholders that maybe were left out of this whole sustainability action plan creation. And I really genuinely think that COVID did not help there, but we are moving on. It's pretty exciting time actually to be at Boise State.
Amy, that's a really valuable thought about making sure that we're incorporating as many different voices and to contribute to this very valuable mission that impacts all of us. This past year, I think our version of your sustainable governance is called CSAC, which stands for the Campus Sustainability Advisory Council. And in this past year, that has moved from a much larger group to a group of 7 administrators that were handpicked by the president to make the voting decisions on that. And the way that we have tried to incorporate extra voices is that group of 7 voting members, which is one committee, is now splitting into 5 different subcommittees that all have unique responsibilities and goals moving towards that. But that came after, I think, about 10 years of this group existing as a CSAC larger group that was first tasked with creating our first climate action plan here at Montana State in 2012, I think is when that plan came out. But 10 years later is when our president made the decision, this group is going to change, and I'm going to pick 7 voting members who I speak with on a regular basis. And it's their leadership that will then delegate into smaller subcommittees that are, I think, turning a group of 7 into probably a group of 30 now. I threw that CSAC link, that a description of our governance group in the chat if anyone wants to check it out.
At University of Idaho, I think the first true effort to address this was with the formation of a sustainability working group that actually led to the recommendation of my position. There were students, faculty, and many staff representing a lot of different areas at the college that put together a white paper with some sort of very broad recommendations about sustainability. That has morphed into, with my hire, has morphed into a sustainability execution group, which is myself, the president, the provost, a DFA rep, and a student affairs rep that meet every 3 weeks to talk about next steps. I think, yeah, I suspect this is going to morph again. We're really at some basic stages of setting up how sustainability is going to manifest across campus. So I would not be surprised if this changed again in a couple of years, but that's what it's looked like so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Our next question, and I'll ask this one to Paul. So the Sustainability Tracking, Assessment, and Rating System, also known as STARS, is basically a sustainability report card that sustainabilities use, report their sustainability data to, and then they can get a rating such as bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. And so the question I wanted to ask you, Paul, and also the group, is how does your university use STARS for benchmarking?
Yeah, our first STARS report came out in 2019. That was drafted by my predecessor in this position. And I think the way that STARS most closely links up with how we talk about sustainability here on campus is in reference to our sustainability framework. In this past December in 21 is when our office submitted a sustainability framework to our university council. And in that council, they approved these 3 goals of the framework, including carbon neutrality by 2040, zero waste by 2035, and a STARS platinum ranking by 2035, out in 12 years from now, right? And what that has put us in a position is that now we can refer to STARS credits as university goals that are approved by university council to head towards. Because in order to score platinum in fewer than 12 years from now, we have to score pretty well on all of those credits. So what has, and then a good example of that is that in this past year, since the framework was debuted, we got to refer some of the investment credits in the planning and administration section of it to our alumni foundation here on campus. And our alumni foundation was able to say, because we are supporting our MSU's goals, now we can incorporate some of the credit language into our own policies. So because of the sustainability framework that was approved from a top-down perspective that includes a STARS platinum ranking, now we can reach out to our community campus partners and invite them to consider, in your own areas of expertise, how does your expertise and everyday profession influence our STARS credits? And that's been really fun. It's been a really great tool for us to be able to hand out and to ask questions about how does your expertise and profession relate to these individual credits. And we've had a lot of great success reaching out with people like from our facilities group and also obviously from our Alumni Foundation. And we're excited to keep doing that into the future.
I can jump in from Boise State and STARS. I think for us, STARS was a really good way to get a comprehensive view of what's happening on campus. Granted, I think we did miss some things, but our first hurdle to tackle was finding out, using the STARS reporting format, where we needed to invite people from. So, putting together those different subcommittees based on the STARS breakdown, and then compiling all the data. We learned a lot of lessons about, we have a lot of dirty data. We have a lot of holes in our data. And so using that data to tell our story, we need to work on the data piece first. But then also, we've never been great at telling our story. And that was something that STARS taught us is, we expected to go into STARS and maybe get like an honorable, thank you for submitting a report, great job. We look forward to hearing more from you in the future. So when we found out we got silver on our first go, we were all very thrilled with that, because it showed the folks that have been doing this for years that, we are making progress, and hey, we got silver right out of the gate. So this is fantastic. What do we need to get to gold? With platinum definitely in the future. So that was very exciting. But I also think it made us look at, okay, when we're writing the sustainability action plan and when we're setting goals for things that we're doing on campus, or even future construction projects on campus, let's make sure we individually meter our buildings and that sort of thing. And some of these decisions that nobody really thought about in the past, because it's like, well, you're one campus, you can get one bill. That's not helpful when it comes to STARS, when we want to say, okay, where are our energy hogs on our buildings and those sorts of things. So it's helping us make better decisions to do in these future projects, and to set better, more, smart goals where they're measurable, and we can set standards for how we want things done in the future in order to collect useful data that we can use for our sustainability initiatives.
I'd like to echo what Suzy said in terms of the framework for STARS has been illuminating, in as much as really pointing out where there's lots of work to be done, and shining a light on what we might not have considered so far. Idaho has submitted 2 STARS surveys so far and received silver for both. I think our president in particular has reiterated many times that he wants the school to be known for sustainability. And I think this is one way that happens, is elevating our rating through ASHE. And so, telling him that, this is exactly what we need to do for a gold rating, even though the STARS 3.0 is coming out this year. And so we don't know what the metrics are going to be on point values and those sorts of things yet. But, this is probably what we need to do to get to gold and to platinum. Allows him to just say, okay, we're doing those things, disseminate the information. I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's makes everyone across the campus really supportive of sustainability, when it is coming very much from a top-down place, at least for some pieces. But it has so far allowed us to really get things done. So he, seeing seeing a list of things that we need to do that seem very achievable really sort of pushes the cart down the road for us in terms of accomplishing what we need to move higher in the rankings, at least so far.
Yeah, and I agree with what everyone has said so far. I think STARS is great for seeing where you're at and seeing what else is possible to do. However, as a kind of an outsider, I still feel like I have the outside perspective coming into this. And echoing what Suzy said, I think that for Boise State, we really need some very visible goals that we can communicate to the community, like the campus community and the outside community, that are not do better on STARS, because that's meaningless to anyone outside of higher education. And I think that we could come up with like a really awesome vision for what we want Boise State to be doing for sustainability and communicate that, and then we will do better on STARS. And so that's my like outsider new to higher ed perspective.
That's interesting, Amy. I was just going to add really quickly. I think you're right about STARS not being something that anyone outside of higher ed is going to understand, except for the Princeton review, which certainly, I mean, is part of higher ed, but the students who are making decisions. But I was just going to say, yeah, a lot of the things, the other piece is a lot of the things to become a truly sustainable campus are not sexy. They aren't high profile. They aren't the things that get you in the news, but they're very important. So for instance, right now we're working on our integrated pest management plan, which we haven't had. And I think that's not something that our senior administration would have been super thrilled about if they wouldn't have known that it would contribute to getting a higher score in terms of STARS. So that's another value I see.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Amy, I'm thinking about your question about the context of where does STARS exist for members of our community too. And I'm thinking back to at the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about defined sustainability. And now I'm remembering a conversation that I had this past fall with a student who was working at Towns Harvest, which is a garden that is associated with different classes here on campus where students can practice either farm or sustainable gardening skills. And I wonder what would happen if I approached a student who was gardening at Towns Harvest and I said, what you're doing right now is relevant to STARS credit AC 5. Would they care? That no, I don't think that most students would associate with that. They're just having fun playing in the dirt, which is great. But is that meaningful if I try to tell a student that what they're doing is contributing to our STARS rating? I'm not for sure. I hope so, but I don't think that's a conversation that we've ever tried before.
Well, if you try it, let us know, because I'm curious too.
Well, great. Thank you so much, everyone. I think at this time, I'll turn it back over to Carson, who has a quick question of her own, and then we'll jump back over to audience Q&A. So take it away, Carson.
Thanks, Ari. I don't know if it's a quick question, but I do have a question. So I loved hearing your example, Amy, of the electric cars. And I guess I would love to hear what are some of the examples of things that you're really excited about that your university is doing. Kind of like, I mean, maybe you're excited about the pest control. Maybe that's really exciting. But kind of like, I would just love to hear some examples of things that are happening that maybe not everybody is aware of that are happening on campus that you would just like to highlight. So yeah, maybe start with Paul, if you have one in mind.
Yeah. A program or a project that has been happening on this campus since 2014 is drilling geothermal wells here on campus that have that started with our business building, and since then has moved on towards other buildings, and then also then moving towards what we're calling energy districts here on our college campus, where different buildings can share heat with each other, so that instead of one building getting too hot and expelling that heat energy into the air, it can actually be moved through a heat pump or stored in a geothermal well to move to another building that is too cold. That started because a student was just wondering, because of how close we are to Yellowstone, what was underneath our feet. And 8 years later, that technology has only consistently improved, and we're really, really grateful for, as our campus has been able to increase in physical size, that we've been able to improve technologies that keeps our greenhouse gases pretty significantly plateaued, or even changing, going down over time.
Awesome. What a cool example.
Yeah.
I'm Boise State has geothermal heating as well. Amy or Suzy, do you want to talk about that, and then maybe another project that is happening here?
Go ahead, Suzy.
Oh, yeah. Yes, we have a number of buildings that use geothermal heat, and would like to continue adding more as capacity allows. We definitely, have a valuable resource there that we can use along with the folks in the city. And so it's an exciting project to keep trying to add more buildings onto that system. I would say one of the upcoming exciting projects for the campus is working towards our first LEED certified building. So this is a huge, I would say, win for the campus, that we're looking at a new residence hall for, I want to say freshmen. I'm pretty sure it's freshman students, but it'll be LEED certified. And
can you explain what that means?
That means that decisions are made during design and construction, and afterward the operation of the building, where we are thinking about long-term costs and long-term performance of the building. And so making sure that it's low impact development type stuff, that we're dealing with the stormwater on site, and not adding anything more to the storm sewer system, that sort of thing. We're using locally sourced materials if at all possible. We're putting in energy efficient systems in the building. We're thinking about the orientation of the building relative to our, the way the sun passes over the valley and that sort of thing, so that we're not building this huge building with all these southwest facing windows that we now need to cool more and all those sorts of things. So just thinking about, in a very, I guess, conscious way, how can this building operate as efficiently as possible, yet still provide the students with a home away from home. Taking into account the student mindset and their needs in the construction of it also, because they do spend a lot of time in campus housing. And I think we've discussed a lot on campus recently, we've moved away from the cinder block little rooms that, all of us saw in movies growing up. It's like, that's a college dorm room. Not anymore. They're thinking about students' mental health when they design buildings like that. So I'm really excited. I know folks on my team and other people on campus are really excited to see this building be built and be LEED certified.
What's the time estimate for when it would be?
Oh, I know we have a shortage of student housing. And so I think the sooner the better. The last I heard was hopefully hoping for fall 2025, but we'll see with the crazy supply chain issues. Everybody cross your fingers for us.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Amy, was there anything else you wanted to add to what Suzy said?
Real quick, for the geothermal, I think Paul's geothermal system is a ground source deep well, and our geothermal system is direct use hot water. So they're slightly different. Like geothermal, I think, can be a really confusing term because there's so many different ways to use geothermal heat. And something that we have coming up that Ari and the student team are planning is a sustainability job fair. And this isn't really like a sustainable action that's happening at Boise State, but it's a really awesome way to connect the students with sustainable jobs that are out there right now. And I want to put this out there in case there's any students on the call, or in case anyone wants to spread this to students, because right now is literally the most exciting time to be in sustainability. Like, companies right and left are making net zero goals. They care. They are trying to actually finally address the climate crisis. And a lot of them are taking it really seriously. I mean, and there's so much funding going into this too. There's climate startups right and left too that are getting literally millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so if you're a student and you want to work in sustainability, it doesn't matter what your field is. You can be in marketing, you can be in communications, you can be in education, you can be in engineering, and there is like a niche job for you out there, and the world needs your help right now. So please, like, explore, feel free to reach out to me and I can hook you up with resources, because I feel super passionate about this. I really want students to know that you don't have to have a job title of like sustainability director to be doing something in this field at large. So
thanks, Amy. That's great. Is the event information online? Can you share kind of the link to that if that's something that's available?
It's March. We have a date, but I don't think we have the information out yet. It's March.
Okay.
What, Ari? Ari knows the
It's
date.
March 9th. It'll be
Okay.
in the sub. Just stay
Okay.
tuned for more information.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And we're going to move into audience questions in just a second. So for those of you in the audience, if you want to start putting questions in the chat, that'd be great. But before we do that, I want to hear from Sarah about any exciting projects happening at U of I.
Yeah, I'd like to mention two things. One is something that we've had ongoing for almost 20 years at this point. So my understanding is that U of I is the first school west of the Mississippi to have a entirely student funded and run sustainability cooperative. So the students in 2006 voted to increase their fees to fund a center that was had a number of student staff positions, and since that time they increased their fees so that it can also fund an actual full-time staff member in addition to a number of student workers. So they do a lot of really wonderful projects. Our students also voted to add an additional fee, which goes towards alternative energy projects on campus. I just wanted to give a shout out to our students because they've done so much incredible work so far. Something that we're working on right now, which I'm pretty excited about, is the sustainability certificate that I mentioned earlier. It's going to be the university's very first certificate that involves all colleges. It's also the first that involves more than one college. So all the colleges on campus are contributing classes towards this, and the goal is to make it accessible for every student on campus. So anyone who wants to add a sustainability certificate onto their majors and or minors is able to do so, because it is so relevant to everyone. So that should be forthcoming within the next year.
Awesome. Well, this is so cool to hear about the diverse things that are going on and kind of just hear how different campuses are dealing with this. Okay, so we're going to jump into audience questions, and we had one from Jade, which was, how does nature fit into your climate action plan or overall sustainability efforts? So whoever wants to take that one first.
I can start. I mean, in a very practical way, nature fits in that we're right now assessing how we have a number of, we have ranch land, we have experimental forests. So we're trying to determine how the preservation of that land can lead towards carbon offsets in our climate action plan. So we have, tens of thousands of acres that we're hoping to continue to protect and preserve so that we can use that in accounting, as well as in carbon accounting, as well as for, you know, the outstanding educational purposes that they've been used for so many years. But I mean, I think it also, in a more philosophical sense, it really underpins everything that we do. My background is I'm a natural scientist. Wildlife conservation is my bread and butter and what I'm really passionate about. And I think, you know, every piece of what we do related to sustainability goes back to that, at least for me. You know, it goes back to protecting an intact ecosystem. And so, yeah, we're working on an integrated pest management plan right now. And that's, you know, very specific to landscaping on campus, but the ultimate goal is to tie that to a landscaping standard that is going to be prioritizing native plants and intact ecosystems and transitioning turf to the polluted prairie, which is an incredibly endangered ecosystem. So it's underlying everything, I think, for what we're doing here.
Thank you, Sarah. That's great. And if maybe I'll let one person comment on that if they have anything want to add, and then we're going to go on to the next question.
I'll jump in just really quickly, since our northern border to the campus is the Boise River. And so a lot of the decisions that we make, you know, we have to consider the health of the river and making sure that our location and relationship with the river stays as healthy as possible, and that we are good stewards of the fact that we are so close to such a iconic landmark. And then we have a great, I want to shout out Gabe, our amazing head of landscaping, who's been working towards, you know, minimizing pesticides on campus and using natural fertilizers. We have a composting program for our leaves and grass clippings, and hopefully in the future some food waste type things from the dining halls, the trimmings from fruits and vegetables, those sorts of things. But he is making decisions on, you know, more appropriate drought tolerant landscaping, eco-turf, you know, encouraging, we're the northern desert. We're not, sod is not native to us. So, you know, eco-turf is much friendlier. It attracts the bees. We have a bee team and beehives on the roof of the student union building, and trying to make these decisions and do some advanced planning so that we are taking care of nature in addition to our students.
Thanks, Suzy. That's great. And if folks have more stuff they want to say, maybe add it to the chat if you have some other ideas or comments on that. We're getting a bunch of great questions. I have some direct message questions, some that everyone's seeing here. I have one that is asking about future waste management practices at BSU or elsewhere, especially for opportunities for students who live on campus. Just curious to hear thoughts about that.
Boy, do I have things to say about waste management. So when I interviewed for my job, everyone said that we were struggling to get recycling back on campus. And I just thought, this is such an easy problem to fix. This is, you know, I'll come back and it will be done. No, we are in a waste management desert in our particular area, in terms of, even when recycling is picked up, it's shipped to Oregon to be processed, which is completely unsustainable in and of itself, right? Everybody thinks you put things in the bin and ta-da, you've saved the planet. It's not like that at all. Composting has been a whole other sort of suite of issues. But you know, the true, I think, panacea, at least of trying to make this work on a college campus, is composting organic waste, recycling what can be recycled, throwing away what has to be thrown away, but minimizing what you're producing so that you don't have very much in that last category. So that's sort of what we're working on too. And you as individuals, as students, can make those decisions. Just don't buy as much stuff that has to be thrown away or that can't be thrown away sustainably, or diverted sustainably into true recycling or compost. plastic, even if you can put it in the bin, it's not going to go very far, recycled once or twice, and then to a landfill or incinerator. So personal decisions really, really matter in terms of the waste management piece.
Thanks, Sarah. Anybody want to add on to that briefly? We have 5 minutes and I have one more question I want to ask. Okay. Well, that was a great response, Sarah. Thank you so much. Okay. So in our last 5 minutes, maybe we can answer 2 questions. We'll do a quick one from the audience, and let's just be kind of like 30-second response, like top response, and then I'll give you one more question to kind of round it out. So Randy Walkins from the city of Boise asked, how can cities or local government best support campus sustainability efforts? Which I think is interesting to think about. You know, campus is its own community, but we're also connected to a bigger community, and how can we all support the work that we're doing in this space? So
I can jump in really quick, just because I think this is something that we've been talking about, and I think probably the quickest and most helpful way is just think about how we can partner. You know, we definitely are somewhat of a small city as a college campus, but we are part of the larger city, you know, in our community. And so how can we do things together? We have so many students that would probably love to participate. So if you have an idea and you need more support, or you're looking for willing helpers, then definitely reach out. And, you know, on my team here, you know, I think it's just connecting the right people to get those resources all brought to the same place.
awesome. Thanks, Suzy. Any other quick comments on that?
From the city, I would recommend advocating for change in culture and infrastructure for transportation in your city space. Especially here on campus, when we talk to students about climate change or their personal carbon footprint, a big part of that is transportation. And for many students, their only option is to use a single occupancy vehicle to move to and from campus. If cities can change culture so that either buses are more easily accessible, or that bike lanes are cleared faster, I think that'll be a great opportunity for students to directly mitigate their carbon footprint by using a sustainable mode of transportation.
I love that idea. Thanks, Paul. All right, so we've got 3 minutes left, and I wanted to end with kind of a round robin and just go around and ask each one of you. I really liked earlier, I think Paul was saying that sustainability is both processes and actions. And so I would love to hear from each one of you. What is a recommendation you have for people listening of kind of like, what is the next step they could take, whether it's a change in process or a change in actions? And so I'll just maybe start with Sarah, and then we'll go Suzy, Amy, and then Paul.
Right. So this, I think, goes back to what we were saying earlier about sort of top down versus bottom up. Definitely, you know, live your morals, live your ethics, and do what you can in terms of, you know, recycling and minimizing use and conserving, but also get involved politically. Make sure you're advocating at the highest level for systemic change.
Thank you, Sarah. Suzy.
I actually need to second what Sarah said. I was going to say is, you know, if you are interested and you have a passion, reach out, tell us about it. We definitely need the support. You know, we can support you and your ideas. We want to hear those ideas. There are a lot of people out there with great ideas that if they never speak up, we can't implement them. So please reach out and please speak out on the political side too, that we need to do this for our planet.
Thanks, Suzy. Amy?
Yeah, I guess I was going to say almost the same thing as Sarah and Suzy. I used to think that sustainability, this was like years ago when I first got into this space, that it was primarily about individual actions and choices. And I have really changed my mind about what I think about that. I think that we aren't given a lot of choices necessarily in society. We are forced to make certain choices, but where you can, yeah, like what Sarah was saying and what Suzy was saying, try to do what you feel is right. But we really need to pressure like the government and corporations to make those choices easier for us. So
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Paul?
And I'll complement that by advocating to play to your strengths. I just made a comment about, advocating for sustainable transportation. If you are in a system where you can't make the choice for a sustainable transportation, that's not the right place for you. If there's a space, if there's a sphere of sustainability that is exciting, that you are passionate about, lean into that. And I recommend not getting caught up on things that you can't do, but focus on the things that you can do, because the more that you do, the more likely you are to find that community that will only engender growth towards that thing that you already care about. So play to your strengths.
Thanks, Paul. I love that. That's a really good one to think about. We are at the hour and I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. So I just want to thank all the panelists for being here today and having this conversation. And thank you, Ari, for facilitating and helping me build out this panel and helping you build out this panel. It's been a really great conversation and hopefully we'll just keep this going. So thanks everyone who was here. And next month, we're going to be talking about art and sustainability and the role art plays. So that should be a really interesting conversation as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great day.
thank you. Bye.
Thank you.